Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you here for tonight's conversation, generational theft, how entitlement transfers are robbing America's youth of future opportunity. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our central host, Ken Langone, who really needs no introduction to this crowd, but let me just say a brief word. Ken, as you know, is Vice Chairman of the NYU Board of Trustees, Chairman of the Langone Medical Center at NYU, Vice Chairman of the Stern NYU Board of Overseers, and most importantly, from my perspective, is just generally a generous soul who is so generous, in fact, that he is here on his 78th birthday. Can we give him a round of applause? So Ken, we have no gifts for you, but we're delighted that you're just a gift that keeps on giving. And the gift this evening is a very important conversation. We pride ourselves in being a convening place for conversations about the big ideas that are shaping society and thinking about how we as a school can convene a pan-NYU body, because we have students here from Stern, from Wagner, from the law school, the College of Arts and Sciences, Tisch, Steinhardt, and I believe we also have in the crowd a contingency of the Can Kicks Back. So we have an important conversation here tonight about a set of issues that all of us should be concerned about. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our host, Mr. Ken Langone.
I just thank you very much. And if there's any titles I haven't got, would you let me know what they are so I can get them too? Let me say this. Obviously, at 78, you would expect I would have a point of view exactly opposite where my thoughts are. I'm here tonight because I want to thank you all for letting me steal from you every month and brag about it, and you do nothing about it. Absolutely nothing at all. And isn't that sad? You're certainly the smartest generation in the history of this country. You've got the best technology going. You've got everything going for you. And right under your noses, there's this horrible thing happening that could only end up in bad results for you, and more importantly, for your children that aren't even born yet. And why is it happening? Because greedy old guys like me. Now think about this. A medical center is named after me. A night program at the Stern School is named, obviously, I'd like to think it's because of me, but the reality is, without the wallet, I don't think those things would have happened, okay? So if I can do that, isn't there something wrong with my wife and me getting $3,500 a month, every month, from the United States government, which is coming out of your pockets, and you're doing nothing about it? You will be, your generation and people your age, older and a little younger, it's the only way we can fix this problem. But if you don't feel passionate enough about it, it won't get fixed, it'll get worse, and one day when you're 78, you're going to wish that you'd listen to that old guy with no hair on his head telling you that because you didn't fix it, the cupboard was bare. I am pleading with you. I'm pleading with you. There is nothing more important in your future and in your life than what you're going to hear Jeff and Stanley talk about tonight. We must figure a way out to fix this problem, and the only certain way is through the political process. Right now, you've got all these old people belonging to all these organizations, this one and that one, and these people are calling up their congressmen and senators, give us more, give us more, give us more, give us more. And nobody's saying, hey, wait a minute, what about us? If we can energize, I call you kids with respect, if we can energize you kids to understand that if you aren't involved, it won't get fixed, and therefore you should be involved. If we can do that, we're on our way. And what's being asked of the old geezers like me is really very little. Very, very little. I heard Simpson and Bowles last week at a conference out in California, and they outlined the things they proposed. They were effectively painless. But because of the way actuarial charts work, if we start now, when you're 78, it'll be fixed. So I'm urging you, let this be a clarion call. Mount up, rise up. You're being ripped off, and you're only letting it happen because you're doing nothing about it. Have I made my point? Okay? Let's turn it over.
You started to. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Ken, for having us. My name is Stephanie Ruhle. I'm an anchor with Bloomberg Television. I got involved in this mission because I met Stan last year. And I thought I was interviewing Stan, this titan in the investment industry, and I guess I listened to his investment ideas. But what really struck me was this idea of generational theft. And we all know that senior citizens have a strong lobby, and they go out and vote. But you need to ask yourselves, are you out there voting? Do you have a voice? You have a voice, but are you using it? And it's not just extraordinary that Ken is here on his 78th birthday presenting to you. But again, here's a 78-year-old man who's saying, you need to do something or my generation is going to steal from you. So it's extraordinary that these three men are not just here speaking to you tonight, that they are taking on this mission and going across the country, because politicians might agree with everything they have to say. When you see Stan's slides in a moment, you could be blown away just like politicians are, but politicians need to get elected every 4 years. And they might not feel like they're ready to get behind this, because not everyone in this room has a loud enough voice, and not everyone in this room goes out and votes. So I urge you to listen to what these gentlemen have to say tonight, because I think it's going to blow you away. And before we get to Stan and his extraordinary slides that he's very proud of, I want to introduce you to Jeff Canada. Jeff is the founder of Harlem Children's Zone, and if you've never heard of him before, A, this is an incredible opportunity for you to meet the leading voice in the country, maybe the world, on education, and B, shame on you, because he's the best there is. So Jeff, first I'd love for you to introduce you and for you to just tell the group a little bit about your work at Harlem Children's Zone and how it has brought you here, how the work you've done with those students makes this mission so important to you.
Well, thank you, and I want to start off by saying that there are a couple of reasons I'm here. One is because I'm still trying to get my money from Ken. He's ripping us all off, and I just, let him pull out his wallet and we can fix this. So I'm going to, some of you are not going to like me because I don't actually worry about kids who go to NYU. Somehow I feel like they're going to probably be all right, right? It's a great school, they get great education, a lot of folks in here are going to make a lot of money. I worry about kids, don't be mad at me. Y'all are going to be all right. I worry about kids at the opposite end of the spectrum, what we're doing in Harlem. And people talk about the work that I do, but I have been with these gentlemen doing this work for a couple of decades now. We have gone into a community and really tried to change the set of outcomes for kids who, for my entire life, have not had a chance to really live out the American dream. This is about young people just having equal opportunity. And I think that's all we wanted. We want to go into a place, while we thought we couldn't save everybody, we just drew a line around 97 blocks and said all the kids in here are going to be our children, and we're going to make sure, starting from birth, we're going to stay with those kids. We're going to get those kids into college. We're going to get those kids through college. And that's the work that we're doing. I think that people have given up on certain groups of young people in this country because they come from very challenging circumstances. But I think that this issue that we're here today, you have folks who come from a variety of political arenas here who are very active in their political, I'm certainly active in my political life, and Kenny is, and Stan is, and they're all different. And we wouldn't agree on lots of things that if you sat down and had a conversation. But the future of the young people in this country, and all the young people, is something we absolutely agree on. And this, I don't think, is a minor issue. There's a time that Stan and Kenny and I were worried about the future of America. And it was right before the fiscal collapse. And Stan, the charts you're going to see, he showed me some charts that were very similar, that showed to the month when our economy was going to come apart. And when looking at this as Americans, we said we have to do something about this. And we went and quietly talked to folk, including on Capitol Hill. And everybody told us, oh, yes, 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 and they didn't do a thing. And we almost watched the country get destroyed. When I first saw these charts, I said, here's deja vu all over again. That we have a crisis in this country, that if we would go our regular route and go talk to the Congress and the Senate, we're probably going to have exactly what happened the last time, which is no one's going to do anything. And so this time, I think we're trying to do something different. So this is, for me, this is all about whether or not my kids that I made this promise to, that if they play by the rules, if they go to school, that they're going to be able to participate in the American dream. This generational theft is taking it directly from these young people, and they're not going to have the same kind of future that those of us on this stage have had. So that's why I'm here.
Can I just ask before we get to Stan, what made you decide to make this your life's work, to help these children fulfill the American dream? We're in a room filled with NYU students, and if I asked, how many of you in here are looking to have careers in education, honestly? That's a pretty good number.
That's a
Better
good
than I
number.
thought it would be.
Very good.
I take back what I said about you people
Yeah.
who raised your hand. I do worry about you all.
But Jeff, the numbers aren't there yet.
Yeah,
They're not big enough.
Yeah.
How did you make the decision to make this your life's
Well,
work?
I'll tell you, and this is part of the problem. We were talking about this off stage. So I went to Bowdoin. Stan and I were there at the same time. Pretty good school. I'm not going to get into that whole thing tonight.
Too cold.
I decided I wanted to be in education, and I had taken science classes, hard science, my senior year at Bowdoin, and I received 2 A's. And the professors came in and said, you can get A's in science, why are you going into education? And I said, because I want to teach, I want to say, they said, no, for real, you can get A's, you could become a doctor. And I said, yeah, I don't want to be good. And they thought something was wrong with me for wanting to go into education. Now, they got the chairman of the chemistry department to come in, and they talked me into going into medical school because they made me feel so bad about going into education. What, if you could do real work,
Because
why would you
girls
do
went into
this?
education?
I mean, no, it wasn't even girls. It was like folks who weren't very smart went into that business. And the only thing, I'll tell you, the only thing that stopped me, right when I was about to apply to medical school, I realized I didn't like sick people, right? So it was kind of, I don't. So it was kind of
made
hard to be a
friends with
doctor, right? So you asked this question about why. I always wanted to do this because when you see this from inside, I see people talk about poverty. I saw poverty from the inside out. I saw what it meant to grow up in a place where people just assumed you had no chance, to go to schools where the assumption was you would never make it, to watch your friends just sort of fall off the edge of a cliff as one obstacle after another tripped them up. And I said to myself, if I ever got out of this, I was going to go back and make a difference, which is how I
And you
got
have.
into this work.
All right, you do like some sick people, Stan and Ken, you're great friends. So Stan, I leave it to you.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity tonight. Secondly, I want to say that I'm the geeky, nerdy guy in the crowd. I can't talk like these two.
It worked out for him, though.
He does very well.
Yeah.
I'll trade a
Don't
few
feel bad
things with
for him.
Stan.
Yeah.
Ken Langone, happy birthday. This is my mentor in life, the most ethical man I've ever met. I've never learned so much from anybody.
Thank you.
And this man on my right, the work you do is just unbelievable, and it's just been a great, great thing to be a part of it. When Jeff and I were your age, the Vietnam War was raging. And I watched a group of young people who saw clear and present danger. Back then, we didn't have a volunteer army. You got drafted. I'm sure Jeff remembers. And so you were literally looking at, if the draft number came off the wrong way, you were going to be in the rice paddies getting shot at for kind of a silly war that a lot of us didn't believe in. And I watched the young people at that time bring down a president and change the whole political spectrum and end that horrible war. And what I want to say to you young people tonight is, while we're not talking about bullets flying, you are in clear and present danger, in my opinion. And somehow the system has been able to hide that danger from you through a number of political maneuvers and opaque system that I think I'm going to go through some slides tonight, and once you see them, you'll see exactly what has been happening. About 40 years ago, our political system started transferring wealth from your generation to my generation, and it's been going on for 40 years, and it's not only unfair, it's borrowing from our future, and it has economic implications 30 or 40 years from now. I'll tell you, the economic implications are enough, and the inequity alone is enough, the unfairness, but you put the two together, it's just astounding. And as I said, it's been going on for 40 years, and because of where we are politically, and we are with the demographic situation in this country, it's about to accelerate, and accelerate in a big way. And can we go to the slides, please? One of my partners today told me I shouldn't put up too much of my chart porn. That
He loves these slides.
I get off the
He loves them
topic
all the
and to go through these as quickly as possible. But
He loves them.
I mentioned, let me see if I can operate the laser. Of course not. We don't need it. I mentioned what's been going on. Quickly here, you see a chart. This is federal government entitlement transfers, a percentage of federal budget outlays. And you see back when Jeff and I started at Bowdoin, they were about 30% of all federal outlays. They're currently 67%. And these are transfer payments. These are payments to individuals who do not perform a current service to get those payments. So there is no productivity going on here. Where do they come out of? They come out of things like education, children, investments in our future. So while that number was going, as you just saw, from 28 to 67% over 40 years, let's break down where that rising line has occurred. So look back to 1965, and you'll see that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and we've taken out the part for non-children, which is in Medicaid, about 22% of federal outlays went to that, and about the same amount went to children back at the same time. You'll currently see that where we are today, over 50% of those outlays go to the elderly, and only 15% go to children. That massive wealth transfer could not be better illustrated than in this chart right here. And I must say, when we found this in Federal Reserve data, it really astounded me. So what you're looking at here is the change in net worth from 1983 to 2010. That's a 27-year period in the United States. And you'll see a couple of very, I think, horrifying factors which go to Ken's point about what's been going on with you and why you need to do something about it. If you are 20 to 28, or more importantly, 29 to 37, but in that general age group, particularly if you're 30 years old, and you look at your net worth today, so 27 years, not today, but 2010 when we have the data, 27 years later, the average 30-year-old's net worth was literally 20% less than the average 30-year-old's net worth in 1983. Now, I want you to think about that. This is during one of the greatest bull markets in history in a period of strong economic growth. 30-year-olds in 2010 in current dollars are worth less than 30-year-olds were in 1983. Why? Because of the wealth transfer I showed on the chart before, and look where it's gone. If you're 65, you are not only worth what you were in 1983, you're worth over twice as much, and if you're worth 74, you're worth 2.5 times as much as you were back then.
Before you go, Stan, how did this happen?
Well, how it happened, Stephanie was right here. We had transfer payments for 40 years, rise and rise to the elderly, and as you'll see, they came out of the young. The young's transfer payments not only did not rise, they went down as a percentage of federal outlays. Now, one of the results of this is if you look at the poverty rates, and let's start in the period we talked about, which is around 1965, 1970, and you'll see that back then, poverty rates for the elderly were around 25 or 30%, and currently they're down to 9%. And I think this is actually a wonderful achievement, and it's an achievement we should all be proud of. There's no more horrifying thought than an elderly person walking around without the means to support themselves. And I don't think anybody in this room would not applaud this achievement. Unfortunately, if you look at children, you see the opposite. The poverty rate for children back then was in the teens, and it's currently in the mid-20s. So the entire drop in the poverty rate in the United States the last 30 or 40 years, which we're so proud of, has been totally concentrated in the elderly. And in fact, poor children have gone up. And I might mention for minority children, this is 35% at an all-time high. Now this chart's a little complicated, and this is really geeky and nerdy, so I apologize. But let me take you through exactly what's going on here. On the x-axis at the bottom is age, and on the y-axis is the amount of money that people of those age groups would spend as a percentage of what a 45-year-old at that time made. Why a 45-year-old? That's sort of the crux of the workforce in their peak earning years, or when they're really contributing in terms of earnings towards society. And if you look in 1950, back in 1960, you'll see that the average 45-year-old spent about 60% of what the average 45-year-old made. And you'll see that the average 90-year-old, which was about 65, 70%, and you'll see the average 90-year-old spent 50% of what the average 45-year-old made. But let's look at today. Today, the average 45-year-old still spends approximately 60 to 65% of what he makes, but the 90-year-old who doesn't have a job and has not been working for years spends 140% of what the average 45-year-old makes. If there's not proof of the fact that you've had a massive transfer of wealth from the youth in our society, or what I call the future seniors, to the current seniors, I don't know what it is, because this chart, I think, illustrates it perfectly. Now, before I go into the demographics, I just want you to realize what I have showed you so far is where we've come in the last 40 years and where we are today. And what we're talking about is a massive wealth transfer that's been taken from future seniors and given to current seniors. Let's just think about where we're going the next 10 years. And mind you, these people have already been at the trough and are doing pretty well. In the next 10 years, according to the Urban Institute, if you look at OMB, the Obama budget, the next 10 years, government spending is slated to grow $1 trillion over 10 years. Not that big a surprise. Of that $1 trillion, $875 billion will go to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, would someone in the audience like to guess how much of that $1 trillion is going to go to children? And I've already netted out the portion of Medicaid that goes to children will be in this figure. Anybody fair to guess? $875 for transfers and entitlements. How much for children? 6 billion, less than 1%. 875 for the old guys who've been stealing from you for 40 years. 6 billion.
Stan,
There he is.
Is education in that number?
What?
Is education included in that number?
Education is included in the number for youth. Education actually goes down, Stephanie, the next 10 years, as no one knows more than Jeff. Now, this is a snapshot of where we are. They've already taken this money. Now, one of the reasons the number I cited is so bad is not just because they're going to increase their share, which they are. There's about to be a whole lot more of them. Back when Jeff and I were born, long after Mr. Langone,
For the time.
after World War II, our soldiers came back, and maybe because of 4 years of abstinence or whatever the reason might be, the fertility rate skyrocketed, and it remained very high for about 20 years. At its peak, in 1957, each woman was having 3 children per woman. Currently, that has come down to 2. And to put that in perspective, in 1957, we had 100 million less people in the United States, but we had more births in 1957 than we're going to have this year. Now, why does this matter to you? Because all those people born from 1947 to 1967 are about to become seniors. For those of you who can't add, although I know everybody at NYU can, 1947 plus 65 years is Bingo, 2013. From now, for the next 22 years, 11,000 people per day in the United States are going to become seniors. And they're going to get the benefits of all those transfer payments I told you about earlier that they're not getting. And here's the problem. So if you take that demographic surge I just mentioned, what it results in is that little box up there, which is between now and 2030, the 18 to 64-year-old group is going to grow 17%. That's what I call your working age population. The 65 and over is going to grow 102%. To put it in perspective, I don't know how many of you go to Florida, but the average age in the United States in 2030 will be more than the average age currently is in Florida. You're going to see more walkers and you're going to see strollers moving around the country. And what that's going to mean is in 2030, instead of having 5 working people supporting every senior, like Mr. Langone, currently you're going to be down to 2.3 in 2030. So you're not going to have the working age population that you have now to support all these entitlements. And if you look at this chart here, it just shows you where the big bulge is. And to put this in perspective, I think current tax revenues are 18% of GDP. If you look at the projections, what's being promised, entitlements alone, this is Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, will be 24% of GDP. So we're going to have 18% in revenues and 24% of GDP. I'm from Virginia, and what they say down there is that dog doesn't hunt. This is probably the most, well, I'd say it's the second most bothersome chart I'm going to show you tonight.
He loves these charts.
I do love charts. I'm a geek, I'm a nerd, I admit it. So this is 2 different boxes. For those of you who have heard primarily Republicans ranting and raving about the debt in this country, you basically hear 2 numbers. One is 12 trillion, which is the stated amount of debt on the books in the United States. The other is 16 trillion, which is the portion that the Federal Reserve also owns. So when you hear the number out there, the debt is 16 trillion, this is catastrophic, the world's about to come to an end. That is debt, official debt that we've accumulated that is on the books in the United States. The problem is the way the government does their accounting, when Jeff turns 65 in a couple of years, and I turn 65 in a couple of years, we're going to start getting entitlements. But according to the government, that's not an obligation. That's not a debt. So that debt is not on the balance sheet. But believe me, it's awfully hard to eliminate, or certainly to reduce, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security payments. It's never been done. In fact, as I just told you, they're slated to grow over the next 10 years. Were those obligations to be on the government balance sheet? So if you took the income stream promised to seniors over the next infinitum, and you took the tax revenues that you're going to pull in, and you took the difference, the present value of that debt is 200 trillion. So what 200 trillion represents, if you took the present value of all the net obligations of the United States, in other words, you put our debt on the balance sheet, you know, something that Enron didn't do. Right now we're running like Enron. We're telling you about the 16 trillion. We're not telling you about the stuff that's coming on the books in the future. That debt is 200 trillion, not 16 trillion. And here speaks to Kenny's point earlier. So what does this all mean? If you're 65 today and you look at that money that's been transferred to you over the last 30 or 40 years, because of that and the current payment system, you're slated to take in, on average, about $327,000 than you put into the system during your lifetime. But if you're an unborn, because of this 200 trillion in debt that's piling up that's going to be paid to people like the 3 of us here over the next odd years, you are going to pay out $420,000 more than you're going to get in benefits. So the way we are set up currently is if you're 65 and over, you will have gotten a transfer, or to use Ken's word, stolen $700,000 from the unborn. Now I ask you, why Why? Why do the unborn, why should they be getting $700,000 less than current seniors? You remember when the sequester happened last February, March. The Republicans, because they couldn't get entitlements and because old people vote and young people don't, so they weren't really interested in pushing entitlements hard, started cutting Head Start programs up in Harlem. They started cutting education, all sorts of things like that. What did President Obama say? We're not going to balance the budget on the backs of seniors. You got to be kidding me. They're getting a $700,000 benefit versus the unborn, and we're not going to balance it on the back of him. You look at all these horrible things you hear in the sequester, and they are horrible. What is the one thing that's remained untouched? Entitlements. It's a joke, and it's a pox on both their houses. And as Ken said, if you don't do something about it, it's going to continue. And not only are you going to get ripped off, the economy is going to implode because everybody knows when you go engage in current consumption and you don't invest, that's what happens. Now, people ask me, why don't I talk to congressmen? I've tried talking to congressmen. They don't give a damn what I have to say. They give a damn whether they're going to get reelected. And old people vote, and you don't. And with all due respect, I've got a 20, a 22, and a 23-year-old daughter, and their main issues are gay rights. Believe me, I'm for gay rights. And their other big issue is the environment. I'm on the board of the Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm big into the environment too. But I'll tell you, we're not going to have any jobs for any of their gay friends, and you're not even be thinking about the environment, because if you don't deal with this clear and present danger, and only the youth can stand up and do it the way Jeff and I's generation did on Vietnam, you're going to get run over.
But Stan, is this strictly because these politicians are basically temp workers, and in the next 3 years they're going to be out of a job, so they simply can't get behind this mission even if they believe it?
The politicians?
Yeah.
The politicians.
When you sit down with Congress, do they actually say to you, you know what, Stan, I like your idea, but I've got to get elected in 2.5 years, pick something else? What's the response you've gotten?
It's a difficult problem. It's politically difficult. The answer being the AARP gives to them and you guys don't. Okay? I don't blame you. I didn't listen to any of this stuff when I was 20 years old either. But I did care about the war. And you are at war. These people are stealing from you. So
Yeah,
Stephanie, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Stephanie, that what Stan and I were watching when the whole sort of debate around the budget began was who was going to really speak up and tackle this issue. And as you know, the Republicans said, well, the Democrats, y'all said y'all were going to do it. And the Democrats said, we might have said it, but we're not going to say it now. Y'all make the cut. No one would touch seniors. And there's a good reason. If you cut seniors' benefits, there's almost a certainty that you are going to be put out of office. And unless both parties did it together, you could, which was some theory that they would both go behind closed doors and come up with the grand bargain, which didn't happen. So this became clear that the Congress had not the stomach for this fight for very basic reasons. And so I think if you talk to Democrats, they blame the Republicans. If you talk to Republicans, they blame the Democrats. They say, when they do it, then I'll vote for it. And the truth is, neither side will do it.
But does it disappoint you that the president
Stephanie,
has... Sorry.
You made a remark that 2.5 years from now, I won't be able to get reelected. That's not leadership. That proves to me they're all a bunch of cowards. Pardon me, I'm being very blunt, but don't expect these guys to be in line for a Medal of Honor. They won't be there.
It's not
But
leadership,
Ken, I don't
it's
care
reality.
I don't care whether they're cowards. The practical matter is, unless you guys stand up, who cares whether they're cowards? You can label them all you want. They're still going to be ripping you off.
You're right.
You need to stand up to these cowards, and you need to tell them that you're going to vote, and your vote counts just as much as the AARP. I have to tell you, Stephanie asked me on the show, was it Wednesday? I can't even remember that far
On
back.
Bloomberg Television,
Monday.
10 a.m. every day.
She asked me,
Watch it.
don't you think the 65-year-olds will fight like hell for this? I actually don't. I think their leaders would fight for it, but maybe I'm an idiot, but I believe most 65 to 70-year-olds don't know these numbers. Right. And if they knew these numbers, I don't believe they would tolerate ripping their grandchildren and their future great-grandchildren off. I don't think they know the numbers. I sure as hell don't think the young people know it, because they're not doing anything.
But why aren't the young people standing up and asking more of their president? When President Obama was first elected, more young people and minorities went out and voted than we ever saw before. And many young people believed that President Obama was going to be the voice of hope, a leader of change, someone in the middle who would speak for their voice. And now that that's not their reality, why aren't we seeing more people stand up? Because they stood up and voted for him at a time when young people didn't.
Ask them that question. Ask them. Let me say this to you. It's critical that you understand we have living examples in America today, not Europe, not Italy, not Greece, not Portugal, Detroit, Chicago, Stockton, California. It's happening here. And the reason it's happening in those places is because they don't have a printing press where they can print money to keep the game going. But I will never understand, as educated and as resourceful as your generation is, please, I don't understand why you don't say, wait a minute, when is enough enough?
Ken, let's give them a chance.
We've been here 30 minutes. How much time do you want to give them?
I thought they had the internet or something,
My
right?
own theory is because of our political system and the opaqueness of generational accounting with the government entitlements is they don't know the facts. That's why we're going to go around to 12, 15 colleges and see if we can stir something up. One of the big responses, and I don't really get this, it's particularly true of the left, is they go, well, this is not a crisis yet. This isn't going to be a crisis for 10 or 15 years. If you look at your own numbers, what's your problem? The problem with that is it's just not true, because I'm sure everybody here has learned about the eighth wonder of the world, the power of compounding. And if you wanted to eliminate that 200 trillion fiscal gap right now, you could do it, but it would be very costly. Here's from the two sides of the political spectrum, if they had their perfect world, here's what it would take. Number one, if you want to fix this by raising taxes, you would raise every tax in America 55%. The payroll tax, the income tax, the capital gains tax, the tax on dividend, you'd have to raise them all 55%, and the problem would go away. The economy would implode, but you'd have your revenues. Or if you're an austerity Republican, you could cut all federal spending 36.2%. If you believe in that, you believe in the tooth fairy, that one happening. So at some point, it's got to be some combination of the two. But look at what happens if you don't deal with a problem for 30 years and you go, well, we'll deal with this when the crisis hits. Those numbers go from 55% to 72%, and the 36 goes to 44, because the debt is accumulating and piling up along the way as long as you don't deal with this problem. One more chart, I swear, and then I'm done. And then we can just get into discussions and maybe even some solutions. This is the one that really, really grates me. And this goes back to our original chart, which is federal government payments to individuals in red. And as you can see, it goes from that 28% level we talked about up to 67%. What's that in blue? That's what we'll call investments. That's education, that's spending on infrastructure, and that's R&D. Okay? As you see, back in 1970, they both were about 30% of the economy. Right now, this number is down to 15% for investments, while we're paying out 67% for current payments. Why does this matter? Let me tell you what some of the investments in that blue line funded. Back in Eisenhower's time, just before that chart started, we spent a lot of money in this country through the government to build the interstate highway system. Can you imagine the United States today with the trucks and everything else going on without the interstate highway system? Anybody here ever hear of something called GPS? Even a 60-year-old knows what it is. Do you know where that came out of? That came from a government-funded, I'm talking to a free market guy here, but that came out from government-funded research. You ever hear of the internet? Al Gore didn't invent it, but it did come out of the government. It came out of government spending, and so, by the way, did the original semiconductor. So here we are spending this money giving it to the elderly who've been increasing their share for 40 years, and it's coming out of education, it's coming out of R&D, and it's coming out of infrastructure spending. I'm done, Stephanie.
How many people in this room, by a show of hands, had any idea that this was the current situation? That what Stan has outlaid for you in the last 13 slides is what the grim reality is?
You all knew this.
That's not everybody raising their hands.
Well, the ones that raised their hands.
And what are you doing about it?
Do they know everything?
I mean, I don't think it's that. Okay, let me say this. It is a problem, but I don't think it's as big a problem as you make it seem. Because, I mean.
Are you doubting Stan's rock and roll? Good for you. Seriously, good for you.
Okay, well, see, as a famous businessman, very successful, you definitely obviously know. Oh, really? Really? I can talk about it. But like, I'm sure you understand like the use of statistics and how the manipulation of statistics can actually, change the meaning and the story of whatever you want to portray. And you did portray a very interesting story with all the graphs and charts that you've done here. But I fear, I may be wrong, I don't pretend to know everything, as I don't think anyone here does, but there were certain details that were missed that could have changed a bit. For example, like some of your graphs said like government spending, it didn't say was it per capita of old people or total, because technically in the last 40, 50 years, the amount of people who have like gone old or how long people have lived has increased. Like that's a fact.
Excuse me one second. I had a chart, but I had to cut them down because Stephanie.
I was about to say, are you really
Things I'm
asking
in love
him
with
for
my
another
chart.
chart? He has them, I swear.
The more detailed they are, the better they are,
19
because if they're very...
In 1970, transfer payments to the elderly were 41% of per capita, okay, whatever, 41% of GDP per capita. They're currently 71% of GDP per capita on transfers for the elderly. So you may be comfortable with that. If I was your age, I wouldn't be. Ken and I love it. Okay, but that's a per capita number, and that's a Federal Reserve number. I did not make it up.
I mean, am I supposed to keep on going? Or should I can go on for a very long time, but I don't want to like just take all your time because this can go on forever.
We love it.
Well, the thing is, yes, that is the fact of the number, but the thing is, that's per capita across the board. But what I'm saying is, the amount of old people has increased, and therefore, spending on old people has increased as they've lived longer, as medical costs
No, they
have gone
haven't
up.
increased. They're about to increase now. That's the point. We haven't even, the demographic problem starts in 2013. All this extra spending in the last 40 years, it has nothing to do with demographics. The demographic problem is starting right now today, 11,000 of us a day. Okay, the last 40 years, this is all current seniors just feeding at the trough, stealing from future seniors.
But this is because, as you have said, baby boomers are getting to that critical age where a lot of them are definitely having to retire or getting to that age where just definitely can't work. But the thing is, the baby boom is a one-time thing caused by an extenuating circumstance that was Second World War. Unless we have another World War and have another baby boom, once this bump passes, like unfortunately when like all the baby boomers die off,
All of us up
eventually
here
when you guys all die
are
off,
dead, right.
this should not actually be an issue because we won't have that large, lot of like as you've said, like 5 working.
Do you know what's going to happen to the bond market if we don't do anything the next 30 years? The interest rates that the government is paying for debt right now, which average about 2.5%, once the bond market figures out that we have a $200 trillion obligation, that's going to go to 30 or 40%. I haven't even gone into the gloom and doom stuff the Republicans talk about because I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen within 40 years, I can promise you that.
When is the bond market, when are investors going to acknowledge this grim reality? You know, when Ken was talking about the printing press, investors have to know, they have to understand fundamentally the debt that this country is in, but they don't seem to care because as long as that printing press is working, whether it's here or overseas, they're going to keep investing and getting richer. When are they going to acknowledge these grave issues and start to do anything about it? Or they just don't care because as long as the markets are working, it works for them. They'll just keep getting richer.
I have no idea. In February 2010, Greek interest rates were locked to Germans. and they were about 40 basis points, and everybody thought everything was fine. 2 weeks later, they were 13%, then they were 26%. It doesn't matter until it matters. Right now, one of the problems, or let me say, one of the unintended consequences of Federal Reserve policy is by buying 70% of the debt that's being issued, they are canceling signals that the market may or may not be sending about this. My own view is it would not be, but how do I know? We have never had, I can remember any political entity address a problem like this until the markets force them to. By canceling market signals, that's a pretty bad unintended consequences of the Fed policy now. There are benefits, but that's a big deal in my opinion.
Ken, if you were to advise these young people, if they believe this,
I'd like to address something to that gentleman because, you know, when you get involved in esoteric things like statistics and all this stuff, it's easy to have a rousing intellectual debate. But let's bring it down to something we should be able all to agree on. My grandfather started out on Mulberry Street when he came here at 20 years old, living in a room with 9 other men, and lived there for 2 years in one room until he saved enough money to send for his wife and his 2 young children. My father went to the 8th grade, my mother went to the 7th grade. My father was a plumber, my mother worked in a school cafeteria. I think I qualify as the American dream. At least I feel that way. Help me out. I have all of what you could possibly expect from this country. Explain to me the fairness of me getting, and my wife got, by the way, forget my 78, we're married 57 years yesterday, isn't that great? You talk about somebody that should get the Medal of Honor, she should get the Medal of Honor. But let me make this point, sir. Fairness is what should dictate. No person in America, no person should go to bed hungry. No person should go to bed with no heat or whatever else the amenities are of life, the basic amenities. But there's something inherently wrong with a system where I won so big, so huge, I could give $200 million to NYU. And I could give many millions more to Stern. And he's expecting more, of course, down the road. But tell me, what society would say this is fair? I assuage my guilt by writing my check over every month. I made a promise that I would never cash a government check. I write it over to a charity you're all paying that charity. Let's talk about the reality. We can make these numbers, that's online, both those. Statisticians can make numbers look.
That's the issue. And it's not just the basic fairness, Ken, that you, and I think you made the perfect point. A system that arbitrarily decides that the Langones need this money while they're cutting Head Start and educate. Now that's a reality. That's not a theoretical thing. That is happening right now. And that's what we're arguing against. It sounds like what we're saying is we want to take all of this from these seniors and leave them destitute. That's not, and stand and get into the solution. That's not what we're saying. We're saying there's some basic fairness here, so that as this thing rises, it's not going to wipe out all of the support for these poor kids, so they never get a chance to do this and undermine, I think, the economic vitality in this country. If you look at what's happening around our investments in education and other things, we're eating our seed corn. This is really serious stuff, and it's not just statistical gibberish that you can just come and manipulate some numbers. They cut Head Start for real. That was not a joke. That is not a theory. It is happening, and that's the beginning of what's going to be, I think, a worse situation.
What was the rationale behind it?
Well, they sequester. They had to do something. They cut something that they knew that no one would pay a penalty.
They wanted to do the ugliest stuff they could do, so therefore it wouldn't happen. But it happened.
It happened.
Got a question here. Yes, sir.
So, our generation been doing about it? Well, for some random reason, 2 days ago, I was writing an article on generational theft, and I thought I'd mail it to the New York Times. I'll read the first paragraph of it. Every generation needs its chances at life, and while I'm sure that we do indeed have many opportunities, there has been quite some generational theft from my generation. We have high schools, but standardized testing steals our creativity. We have promises of higher education, but instead of affordability, we have student loans, which steals our financial security right from under our feet. One economics professor here said that Medicare and Social Security is a Ponzi scheme which our generation was paying for. It's bizarre, a country which hurts its own young in so many ways. Should I go on?
It's great.
No, we get it.
That's great.
Did they,
It's great that they publish it.
first of all, I applaud you. Did they publish it?
I didn't send it yet. I just wrote it.
Well, if you
2
get
days
it
ago.
published, you're doing better than me. I'm 0 for 3 on Putin's 1 for 1, claiming he's a man.
My man. My man.
I think that's terrific. But I think you guys need to get a little rowdy. I mean, we marched on Washington. I didn't, but back in Vietnam.
He looks at me.
But frankly, a lot of you raised your hand, and that's probably because NYU is an elite institution, and you've got figures that other students don't have. But I can't believe these figures are known, that your children are going to pay in $400,000 more than they're going to take out, and Langone is getting in $325,000 more than he ever paid. And by the way, we can't even get Washington to means test. And by the way, if you think the millionaires should get it anyway, let me give you one more fact. Can't help it, Stephanie. If you're wealthy in this country, your life expectancy is 5 years more if you're poor. So you're not only getting at the trough, you're getting it 5 more years than a poor person. Why can't we means test people like me in a few years and can?
Now,
You know why they won't do it? Because they think it sort of cracks the code. It's like if you smoke pot, you're going to heroin. It's the same theory.
But Stan,
A few of us proved that as wrong, but we're not going to get it. We're not going to get into that, all right? We're just leave it alone.
Stan, if politicians aren't listening to three of some of the most influential people in this country, why are they going to listen to young people who need to focus on getting jobs, paying rent, getting Goldman Sachs?
Because we have
to hire
one
them?
vote. They got Obama elected. The last time I checked, McCain was the old guy. This guy was supposedly going to help out the youth.
now, the older I get, I'm having trouble with numbers, but there's 3 here and there's hundreds there. You tell me who they're going to listen to. I have a question for all of you. What's our axe, selfishly, in this presentation tonight? What do we get out of it? Why am I here? Why are they here? We have great lives. We have beautiful homes.
Nice
Why?
wives, too.
Great wives. And my wife gave me my live stream. She gave me a Jeep for my birthday today. And I'm having
Jeep was
a
your
Jeep.
live stream?
Yes, sir. I got a Jeep, and I drove all over the North Shore of Long Island yesterday like it was Christmas morning. Please help me. Help me. You have no idea how passionate I am about this. This is the greatest country on earth. We have to figure a way out to make it stay the greatest country on earth. And if there's people like me who don't need it, who get it, who take it, who have no sense of guilt, then the only way it's going to work is through the political process.
We have a gentleman here with a question.
Go ahead, right here, sir.
So, I'm going to stand up.
Please.
My name is Robert Hawkins. Thank you. My name is Robert Hawkins. I'm from the Silver School of Social Work. I'm a faculty member. I have a set of slides too, but I didn't bring mine. But I want to applaud you actually for what you're doing and what you're talking about, and it's something I've spoken about in my classes. And I expected actually to hate this talk, but actually I really applaud what you're doing. I have some issues with the framing though, and I get it, because just like if you're going to sell something, it's got to sound good, and generational theft sounds really good. But you could also be talking about how society's changing. You could be talking about the loss of labor market, how there are fewer investments going into the system, how the economy, real income has declined over the years, so there's not as much money going into the economy. So that affects Social Security, it affects the outtake. One thing you left out that I thought you would include, but I thought maybe you didn't want to scare the children too much, so was that there's no real money there. That the money that we're talking about, people pay their Social Security taxes, and they think it goes into that lockbox that Al Gore talked about a few years ago, or a decade ago, or however long ago that was. And really, it goes into the budget. It's not money that they actually, that you can't go to see your money. You can't visit your money because it's just not, it's not really there. So you left that part out.
Well,
But-
we did not leave out, there's a chart on investments right
well,
there.
investments,
That's-
that would explain it.
We couldn't
But-
agree more with what you just said about investment and eating our seed corn.
But here's the thing that I understand, Mr. Langau, you get your $3,500 or so every month and you give it away, which is great, but the average payout is only about $1,200. You're getting the maximum. You're right there at the maximum.
Isn't that sad?
And yes, and that is sad too. And so what I'm very interested in hearing is what do we do? Because if you're getting, when many of us retire, we're gonna get 57% of the money we put in, of our income, of our current income, or whatever our retirement income is, we're gonna get back about 57% of that. So I don't anticipate being able to survive very, very nicely on that. If you never put that much into the system, if you were low income, you're not gonna get that much out of it, at least on a monthly basis. If you look out another 20 to 30 years, sure, you're gonna take in, get back more than you put in, but on a monthly basis, it's gonna be hard to live on 57% of what you used to make. And then children get another, what, 1,200, 1,100 or so of that. I left my charts at home, so I can't remember the exact figures anymore. So I'm really interested in hearing then how do we move to a solution? Because this is scary stuff, but the only way this will change is for the politicians. Someone's got to be brave enough to say, okay, I'm going to raise taxes here, I'm going to have means tests there. Otherwise, or we'll have death panels that Sarah Palin talked about. We need, because people are living longer, we need some kind of workable solution, and I'm just wondering, where is it? I know you keep saying you're going to get there, so I'm happy to hear that, but where exactly is that?
I'm a little confused. This is pretty simple to me. If I'm a congressman and all I do is get calls from guys like me, my age, more, and I don't hear from people like you, that's easy. I give you what you want. There's got to be a risk-reward component here. When I said we need you, you need yourselves. I need you because I feel strongly about what made this country so great was to give a poor kid a chance to succeed in, I can't believe it happened to me, but it did. And it won't happen to that kid that comes out of Rosslyn High School at 18 years old this past June. This is simple stuff. Let's not complicate it. Stanley is proving to you it will happen. I am saying to you, it's the political process that will only drive these people. I call them cowards. They are cowards. You may quote me. I will give you the names of all of them, and I'll call them cowards by name.
But Ken, the professor asked, I think a great question, is how do you start to get your arms around the problem? So let me tell you the first thing I wouldn't do, which is what even the brave souls out there supposedly have recommended. And for example, Paul Ryan, who really cost his party when he came out and said, we're going to do vouchers and we're going to do anything, but we're going to exempt anybody who is over 55 years old. Remember that? And then they ran the YouTube thing of him pushing Granny over the cliff in the wheelchair, and the Republicans lost a seat in upper state New York that they hadn't lost in 100 years. So why are we exempting everybody over 55? I just showed you these people have taken in $325,000 more over their lifetime than they put in. You just documented the fact that the unborn and the next generation is paying that tab. And it's not like we had the money to go away. They're going to be in debt. They're going to get a negative thing. So first of all, let's start with means testing. What is wrong with means testing? I don't.
Why?
Why?
Take me out. But that's the whole point.
It's a bad word politically because we vote and we pressure Congress and the youth doesn't. But I have seen the youth rise up, okay? We're now getting stuff done by the EPA that wouldn't have been done except for the youth vote. I have seen them rise up, but for some reason, they're AWOL on this topic. That's one thing is means testing. Let me give you another example of how the system is geared for the old, or let me say current seniors to get transfers from future seniors. What was the biggest tax cut going in the early 2000s? They cut capital gains and dividends. Let's just think about this. The average 60-year-old has 6 times the net worth of the average 30-year-old, okay? So who pays capital gains and dividends tax? The elderly who are clipping coupons, not the 30-year-old plumber, his former great-grandfather or whatever he was, I guess your father,
My father.
okay?
I'm old, but not that old, for Christ's sake.
So here's just one way the system is rigged. That's a direct transfer of wealth from future seniors to current seniors. Why should their income be taxed at a significantly lower level than people who are earning current income? And again, they have 5 to 6 times the net worth seniors do of the average 30-year-old. Sorry, we had another question?
Right here.
So sometimes I think these numbers can be hard to get our heads around. So $200 trillion of the present value future outlays is kind of hard to understand.
Thank you.
Can you
my
give us an
strong point.
idea of how worse this problem has got from? Here I see 2007. It looks like we're at 60%, and now we're at 67. So how far up has that number gone in 6 years?
The 200 trillion, are the can kicks back guys here?
Right there.
Okay, Larry Kotlikoff did some work. Wasn't this number only like 60 trillion like 10 or 15 years ago before all the tax cuts and Medicare D? So the fiscal gap has grown rapidly, but even the debt problem, the 16 trillion was, Jesus, when I grew up it wasn't a trillion. I mean that thing, but the point is we're about to hit the point where it really goes up because you talked about you put money in a lockbox. The government calls that, I don't even know what they call it, but you know what it is? It's a debt. The government is borrowing money from you that they're promising to pay back after you're 65. By the way, it's about as good as subprime was 10 years ago, in my opinion, that you're going to get all that money back. But that's a debt. But it's not on the government balance sheet because that's not what we call future entitlement payments. And the point is, in the next 10 or 15 years, that debt is going to start coming on the balance sheet. Is the debt going to go to 200 trillion? No way. No. That's a present value number, and you're right, it's hard to get your arms around. What I can tell you is in 30 or 40 years, that debt at current payment is going to be a hell of a lot more than 16 trillion, and it's going to be enough to really steal interest payments and everything else from the next generation.
White shirt.
The question I have is, to what degree do medical costs play into this? Let's say by some stroke of miracle, we could solve the we could solve the medical cost crisis and bring it under control. To what degree would this problem go away if medical costs were contained?
It wouldn't go away, but it's absolutely huge. And we could
Could you
make,
put a percentage on it?
well, here it is right here. There's Medicare and Medicaid and the exchange subsidies. This is Congressional Budget Office estimate looking forward. And so we're talking about 17% of GDP between now and 2080. Current tax revenues are 18% of GDP. That's everything. Defense is gone, Head Start, everything. So if you could significantly dent medical costs, it would not solve this problem, but it's one piece and probably the most important piece to this puzzle.
So, I mean, people in this audience are concentrating, and yourself is concentrating a lot on Social Security.
No, no,
Means
no.
testing Social Security.
All the
I'm
time.
not concentrating on Social Security.
It seems to me, though, that the healthcare crisis would probably benefit more from our energies than the Social Security
Yeah,
one.
but let me,
That's an accurate statement. The medical one is the big banana, and if you want to talk about it, we're happy to talk about it. But there's a lot going on here. That is the holy grail. That is the most important piece if you could stop that.
statistically, you ready? I would have been dead 30 years ago, 75 years ago. I'm living longer, but guess what comes with age? Hearing problems, sight problems, diabetes. I can go on and on and on. We live in a society where we celebrate life. We do everything we can to extend it. And by the way, I want to defend doctors. I think it's a tragedy how little doctors, when I see our docs up at how little they're paid compared to the effort. A neurosurgeon doesn't begin to earn an income until he's 36 or 37 years old, and he's probably in debt $300,000 or $400,000 at that point. We got the best deal in the world with our healthcare system. But if we're going to fix it, we got to talk about tort reform. We've got to talk about all these things that go into driving. That's a bigger issue. The better issue for me is two questions. I got one for you. How many people are worried about a job when you get out of here? How many people are about worried? Raise your hands high. Okay, so you're worried. If you want to know what's going to impact jobs 50 years from now, think of what you saw here tonight.
How about 20 years from now?
Better.
Can I just comment one second? Let's look at current spending. This is 2007. Look at how much more the 90-year-old is spending than the rest of society. Look at public health and private health. It's more than the 40-year-old is spending, period. And this is all health care. Look, the health care problem, again, that's the biggest part of this. And in my opinion, but this has got to be worked out by politicians and by society at large, there's a couple things you could do right now that would start to attack the problem. First of all, malpractice insurance is a direct transfer from doctors to lawyers. And I think we all know how much productivity the lawyers are contributing to that patient's welfare. Secondly, it's more sinister than that, because in order to avoid suits, what we do is, if you're the hospital, you run 13 or 14 tests. It's called CYA. So you don't get sued because you didn't run all the tests. By the way, it doesn't hurt also because you're paid as a percentage of revenues. So it's actually good for you to run all those tests. And let me tell you how effective those tests are. So the red is how much the United States spends on healthcare versus the other countries in the G20. And you can see we spend a lot more than any other country. But look at where we rank in terms of medical outcomes among those countries. We stink, okay? So we are paying much more money and getting less out of it. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is incentivize the consumer to look at his bill. We have such an opaque system right now in terms of third parties, fee for service, that nobody knows what they're paying, and therefore they don't care. A former associate of mine pointed out an article to me in the New York Times 3 weeks ago where a saline bag, the saline costs like 44 cents to $1, and the hospitals are getting $595 for that. Now that would not happen if there was co-payment and a direct relationship between the consumer of healthcare and the product served you. But by the time it goes through insurance companies and all these other layers and you don't have co-payments, that's what's going on. So my solution, which is that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to point out the problem to you. This has to be solved in the political arena. But you could go a long way toward denting the increase in medical costs if A, you got rid of the opaqueness and you put co-payment and consumer choice into the equation like it is in almost every other sector of the economy, and you reform malpractice. Kenny, you have a medical center named after you. You probably know more about this subject than anybody on the planet. Do you have a view?
Yes.
It's shocking, I know.
I'm working on coming out of my shell. It's not easy, but I'm working on it. You've got to look at the totality of the problem. You've got to bring... This weekend, I saw on television an ad that if you bought Vioxx, if you had a prescription, you're entitled to a refund. Now, Vioxx hasn't been sold for 7 years. That ad was being paid for by a law firm that gets paid a percentage of the amount of money that goes out of that fund to reimburse people. They weren't injured. There was no medical malpractice. These people bought it and it was good and that was okay. But because it was pulled from the market, we need to look at medicine in every single way we can. We are living better, we're living longer. Thank God we had something called the NIH, and tragically, the NIH is getting hit more than any other government agency in what's going on with these sequestering.
Yeah, they're killed in the sequester. That's an example I should have brought up.
This is your seed corn. This is your seed corn. Thank God, I'm bragging now, our medical center, our numbers absolutely keep going up, so our percentage is even getting better for us. But you'll never know where you're going to find a Jan Vilcek, who was here at NYU, that invented Remicade, or a Salk and Sabin, who invented the polio vaccines. I remember as a little boy growing up on Long Island, you couldn't swim, because if you swam in the Sound, you'd get polio. Polio's gone. But where did that money come from? The NIH. These are the collateral costs that we have to take into account. Stan, you're right. There's no need. For example, what the hell is the government paying $800 for a toilet seat for the U.S. Air Force? And yet they caught them spending $800. Come to Home Depot, we'll give you one for $9.95, $19.95. We'll ship it. We'll even have somebody put it on for it if you want. But seriously.
Seriously.
This is it.
Jeff, tell them the battle your kids face with healthcare up there. It's just brutal.
Yeah, it is absolutely brutal. And I think that this issue about whether or not we are trying to do anything other than make sure there's an equitable sharing. That's all. And I think that in lots of communities, we are disproportionately hit by all of these issues, and healthcare is clearly one of the ones that my kids are getting killed on. And I mean that literally.
There's a woman here.
Well, I was just going to say that even with the spending, it's definitely hitting those from low-skilled jobs, definitely those that are in poverty right now. It's hitting them hard. It's actually hitting them harder because the policies that are happening and the spending that's going on, they're not even taking into account of the working poor. But I think that at the end of the day, it's definitely affecting race. It's definitely affecting those that are poor without them even fully understanding it. But I think that right now we're just asking too many questions. I mean, they're here for a reason, and they're really here to. They've been referencing Vietnam for like the whole time. we really need to try to create a movement through this. And as young people, I think that maybe even trying to use social media plugs, or I don't know how you guys are promoting it. Obviously, you're going around to other colleges to really try to start some form of a movement. I think that that's where this begins. Like, the economics behind it, I have no clue what these numbers are, but it just doesn't look good. It doesn't. It's really scary. And so I think that, you know, these three very important gentlemen are here, not necessarily, they're giving us the bare minimum right now by giving us the numbers. We all know the numbers don't look good, whether it's like 1 billion, 2 billion, that's still a whole lot of money. So I think that for young people right now that are here, that are interested in this generational theft, we need to start some form of awareness of it. You know, that's just really where it starts.
Well, then tonight you can hashtag generational theft, and you don't need to have extraordinary finances to start this movement. You can engage social media, and it costs you nothing. I can't imagine that every person in this room doesn't have a Twitter account. And if tonight you go home and you share 140 characters worth of your thoughts on generational theft, or tonight you're going to start trending bigger. And Stan, this is probably a good opportunity for you to talk about the can kicks back. Oh, see, he's so good with the slides.
So when Jeff and I were up at Bowdoin, I got the question from the young people, how do we start a movement? And I said, come on, I gave you the facts. I'm a 60-year-old washed-up money manager. You got to be kidding me. And interesting enough, after the Bowdoin talk and after Stephanie, there are a couple young people here. Could you stand up, please? From the Can Kicks Back. They have helped finance some of the studies we've showed. And this is one way to get involved, is through them. But again, you can do it on your own. I don't know social media. I'm here to present the facts. You figured it out. It doesn't look good, okay? The movement has to be up to you guys. And these guys are putting their hearts and soul into it. I don't know whether the answer, but that's where I'd start if I was trying to get this thing moving.
And can I just say this, because I think your point is well taken. You all are going to be right in the middle of hearing about all of this, because all of this budget stuff is coming back up again. And just listen about what they're going to be cutting. Just listen to all of the services for poor people, which are going to be on the chopping block, as if that's the only answer there is left. How much more in food stamps? How much more in support for food, for the hungry, health services for the poor? You're going to hear that, and you're going to hear no one, either on the Democratic side or on the Republican side, suggesting there's any money that could ever be saved that goes into this stuff. So I think that those of you who are wondering where the pressure points are in this, when this debate heats up, and it's starting right now as we begin to talk about whether or not they're going to up the spending limits and how we're going to deal with the sequester, you're going to hear what's on the chopping block. And I will guarantee you, the one thing you're not going to hear are any of these services going to the seniors that we've been talking about. And we're not talking, and again, I just have to say this because it sounds like we're saying we're against Social Security, we're against Medicaid, we're not. We're saying let's do reasonable reforms so folks who don't need it don't end up getting it. Let's start there.
Here's what we're against. Your children are going to pay $400,000 more than they're going to get in, and my generation is going to get $300,000 out. Surely some of that $700,000 can be transferred back to you instead of cutting NIH, food stamps, Head Start. It's ridiculous. And this is untouched. It's the one thing they didn't talk about, and they're not talking about.
But if you hashtag generational theft and you include in your message to your local politician, to the governor, to the mayor, to the president, those politicians have teams that follow social media. So if it's not in your wheelhouse to figure out who your congressman is and call it, those politicians don't want their names in the middle of Twitter with a question mark, what are you doing about generational theft? That's a bigger issue for them than getting an answer, than getting their secretary called and them not answering. You can engage politicians more than you realize you can, and it doesn't cost you any money, and you can follow organizations like the Can Kicks Back. And so many of your friends who are at other schools should show up when these gentlemen travel across the country to speak out. We should fill every auditorium because your peers should want to hear this message. Even if at the end they don't agree, everyone should have a tremendous amount of respect for this group of men who are taking their time and their money to get behind this mission.
Let me give you a thought. Every once in a while, a public hanging has a very positive effect.
I'm not associated with it.
The next thing he
This is
said.
like the definition of a headline maker. He's like a journalist dream. Yeah.
I can't wait till I'm 78 so I can say
I
stuff
can
like
say,
that.
I can
I
say
know
whatever
you
I
really
want
do.
at 78, and they let me do it, and it's wonderful, okay?
Spitzer took his shot and he whiffed.
He's gone packing. Let me say this to you. All it's going to take is targeting one congressional district. And you people get mobilized. You want to pick a district that's a borderline district. And you make the difference in that election. You want proof? A lot of people in this room probably don't like the Tea Party. But guess what? The Tea Party is having an incredible impact. Not necessarily in a positive way. An incredible impact on the political process in America. Pick one. But I can't understand why you aren't all running out right now to go to the streets and staying. Remember that movie Broadcast? I'm tired of it. I've had enough.
They're too young.
What do we need to do to get you to understand this is for you and about you?
But you know, Stephanie made a point, a light bulb went off in my old brain.
Go ahead.
We didn't have social media and the tools you had back in the Vietnam era. You have tools. You don't even need to march on Washington or down the street. You have tools that we didn't have. Facebook, you can bombard.
Stan, they can tweet at the president, and it might be a less than 1% chance
What
that
does
he'll
tweet mean?
respond.
Just kidding,
Exactly.
okay.
But he could. If you tweet a politician, you have more than a 0% chance he will respond. You've never had an opportunity like that before. Seize it. If you agree with them. Yes.
Jessica?
I think I'm obviously a huge fan of this. I'm really involved in the Can't Kicks Back organization. And just to talk about why people in our generation aren't getting rowdy, I think that when you think about other causes like gay rights, abortion, the environment, you have pictures of polar bears, you have education, you watch Waiting for Superman, you have a very tangible notion that if abortion doesn't get, pro-choice leaders don't get passed, then you can't get an abortion or have access to it. And I think that for this issue, because it's in this financial spectrum, that in order to get people rowdy and get people behind this movement, we need a polar bear. And I think we need, that image of what is actually going to happen, because I think, when we talk in this arena at Stern, everybody here understands the bond markets and we all care about that. But when we really want to galvanize the average Joe, and even more importantly, the average Jane, who definitely is not feeling comfortable with the bond market, I think we need something that is a tangible image of actually what the hell is going to happen if this blows up. And I think that talking about that and getting people really, giving them the ability to wrap their heads around it in a really kind of easy to understand way is really important.
Jeff, do you remember the welfare queen?
I do.
Let's give them the last word because people want to
Perfect.
tweet.
Thanks, Peter.
Please, please get involved. It's not just your future, it's your children's future and it's your grandchildren's future. Please, don't let this happen to this great country. This is the greatest country on earth. There'll never be another America ever in the history of mankind. We can fix this problem. We need to look at it, and I'm begging you. Not for me. I've had a hell of a run. My wife and I are blessed beyond words. I just want to make sure that the other kid that comes along someday, the Stan Druckenmiller, the Jeff Canada, the kids we have up in our charter school up in Harlem, that chance that we all had, they have. You got to get involved. I'm begging you, please get involved. And if you do it, trust me, it'll happen. Works. The political process works. And we live in a society where we settle our issues at the ballot box. Please get involved.
Stan, Jeff, Ken, thank you.